In the official Australian Constitution, Article 125 states that the seat of government of the Commonwealth shall be within territory which shall have been granted to or acquired by the Commonwealth, and shall be in the state of New South Wales and be distant not less than 100 miles from Sydney. So the government picked a random patch of land somewhere out in the countryside and decided to call it our capital. The government being the government, they called upon the general public for a design, hoping for a gem to be called the design for the new city. Australians being Australians, an American architect ended up winning the competition in 1911, Walter Burley Griffin. So in 1913, Walter was invited to the land of the meat pie to supervise the construction. Griffin wasn't a city planner, but a landscape architect, and was thus influenced by the Garden City movement from the 19th century, a reaction to the overcrowding and pollution of cities since the Industrial Revolution. He wanted wide promenades leading from a central point, surrounded by trees and greenery and wide open skies, the feeling that you're walking in a tranquil garden. But aside from this, he wanted a few specific features. Parliament was to be built on Camp Hill, a lump in the middle of the city. From here, wide avenues would radiate outwards, each one named after their state capitals, which were rejected to be the national capital. There was to be a large water feature created by damming the Mongologolo River. And as well as this, he wanted all the surrounding hills and greenery to say just that, green. So when this all had been decided in 1913, good old Walter was brought over to the chosen site and appointed the FCDCC, the Federal Capital Director of Design and Construction. The government was determined to build the city despite the fact that World War I slowed progress considerably. From 1913 to 1920, all that had been achieved was the marking out of the main avenues, the completion of the plans, and the construction of the dam to provide the water supply. In 1921, Burley Griffin's design contract ended and work was handed over to a government agency. And it got even slower. In the 1920s, the government made it a priority to move the Parliament to Canberra, because for some reason they chose Canberra over Melbourne to hold Parliament in. So the government agency now in charge of Canberra decided to build a temporary structure. And because Prime Minister Billy Hughes was just a little bit stingy, or maybe because this was happening just a few years preceding the Depression, but nah, I think it was just Hughes being stingy, they decided to build Old Parliament House at the bottom of the hill. Work began in 1923 and the building was opened in May 1927 by the Duke of York. In the 1930s, Canberra grew very slowly, just like a couple of kids in this class, as the impact of the Great Depression really began to be felt. And it wasn't until Prime Minister Menzies came into power that Griffin's original view of the city came into fruition. The building of Canberra not only was a very important part of post-World War I Australia, but it was a good insight into factors affecting Australians at the time. We have to consider that unlike the European superpowers, Australia was not massive, do you even live bro? And the war took a huge toll in death and in the economy, but it was really important in putting Australia into the global sphere. For the first time pretty much ever, Australia was finally feeling like a nation in its own right. And as a part of this, it was important to commission this new city where all the politicians would come together to govern the new nation. One nation. The fact that such a grand project was being commissioned, even during a depression, shows us that representing the newfound unity was very important to Australians. At least now the politicians would stay away from Sydney.